Hey everybody! So today we're going to talk some about the Galactic Center. What we're going to talk about though, I'm going to be applying some things to the notion. Okay, okay, I'm honestly not sure exactly how this fucking ties in with the GC, but I know it does. I'll put it like that. I know it does. And for some reason, I wanted to go ahead and do a video about this, even though I'm not totally sure how I want to put all these pieces together. So in saying that, I am absolutely not, I do feel like I have a decent understanding at this point as to how the GC works. Pretty somewhat decent understanding. However, as I include new things and new ideas, to play around with them, to fuck with astrology, I do reserve the right for any and or all of this to be wrong later, without somebody being like, well, you said blah, 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 blah. Because this may go somewhere, or this may absolutely go nowhere. I don't really know. I feel like it's going to go somewhere though. Okay, so I'm going to talk about X-rays. Planets emitting X-rays. Most planets, they have now found, do emit some kind of X-ray. There are 3 different types. I'm reading from my notes here to make sure that I don't fuck any of this up. Fluorescence, scattering of solar X-rays, and auroral emissions. Now, the only planet that they haven't found does this yet in some way is Neptune. I would lay a little money out that it does. But Neptune is Neptune and isn't always the clearest of the bunch. So while we don't know what it does yet, or if it even has them, I would bet that it probably does. I would bet a little money that it probably does, that they will find in time that it does. So I'm looking, just to back up for just a second, with the GC research, there are planets, obviously, that I am, if you've been following these at all, there are planets that I am focused on tying in with the GC. Obviously Jupiter, since the GC is in Sagittarius. Jupiter retrograde specifically. Uranus is another one that I've mentioned several times that I do feel like ties into the GC. I think Neptune does too, and Pluto. All of the outer planets, I think, do in some way, though I do think that Uranus has the strongest tie to the GC. I think it does. I recently brought Saturn into the mix. I do think that Saturn has ties to the GC as well, just in a different way. Breaking through Saturn's limitations, its boundaries, what it imposes in the physical world, since Saturn also deals with physical trauma, like physical trauma in the physical world. Breaking through those boundaries to be able to get to what's next, if you will. Chiron. Chiron is another one. It's not a planet, it's an asteroid, but it's another body that I feel like does tie in with the GC. Chiron is another one. I can't find anything on that, whether or not Chiron has any kind of X-ray emissions or not. I'm still looking at that though. I don't know if it does, but so I'm looking at X-rays, what the different planets do, and I also am going to tie in some esoteric astrology here. This is something that I do know, but it's not really anything that I don't work with esoteric rulership a whole bunch in practice, and not really. It doesn't really come up for me to. So I kind of had to dust off some books, if you will. It's been a minute since I've really engaged with it, but I'm starting to think that I'm going to need to engage with it more, especially after all this shit, I went down this rabbit hole of planets and x-rays. I think it's really interesting that Jupiter is the only other planet besides Earth that emits auroral emissions, X-ray emissions. But it does it, obviously because it's Jupiter, it's going to do it in a bigger way. Now I'm tying esoteric astrology into this because Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, but its esoteric ruler is the Earth. So I think it's interesting that these two planets are the only two planets that do this type of auroral emissions. I think that is interesting. And for some, this may not lead anywhere having to do with the GC, but I think it probably will. I just need to sit with it more. And if anybody has any ideas about this, let me know. Okay, so they recently, actually, let me start with Saturn first. Now, like I said, most planets do emit some sort of X-rays. Jupiter also emits, scattering of solar X-rays, like from the sun. It does that too. Now, Saturn does its rings fluoresce, meaning they light up, and they also do the scattering of the solar X-rays too. That planet does that as well. And Uranus, they recently found out Uranus does emit X-rays as well. Uranus is a weird one though. They can't figure out how exactly it emits X-rays. They're not really sure how this happens. I'm going to take a guess here. I'm thinking that it'll probably do all three. I think it probably will. It'll fluoresce. It'll do the scattering of solar X-rays and auroral emissions. I think they'll probably find that it does. I think they'll probably find that it does. And I bring that up because there is a tie, right? There is a tie, obviously, between Saturn and Uranus, with Aquarius having been ruled by Saturn by traditional rulership and Uranus by modern rulership. So there's already a tie there. I have a feeling it probably does what Saturn does. But I also think it might do what Jupiter does, because in esoteric astrology, Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, but its esoteric ruler is Jupiter. So that ties those two together. And it also ties those two together. It's kind of a link. It's another link with bringing Jupiter and Uranus together in this GC research. In my mind, that's kind of where it's going. They're weaving together in a slightly more concrete way than me just saying I feel like they fit together. Does that make sense? I'm trying to figure out why I feel the way that I do about these things. Also, so I think that's really interesting. Pluto's another one that does emit X-rays, like but they're also not real sure how that happens. But not as much is known. There's not that much known about Uranus's either, but there's even less known about Pluto's. It has to do with how far away it is and the pictures. Something about I don't really know. I don't really know exactly. But there's some fucking reason why they don't really know exactly. They don't seem to really have any kind of idea why Pluto does this. So I won't even go there yet. I'm sure, yeah. But another thing I wanted to bring up is, I tend to think of Saturn more positively, and I do think that Saturn ties into the GC, and in esoteric astrology, it's kind of thought of as the gatekeeper, which is kind of how, without using that term, it's kind of how I think about it in terms of like accessing the GC stuff. It really is. In a way, like not directly, but I do think it is kind of like a gatekeeper of sorts. I really do. I think it definitely ties into. Anyway, I'm going to get going. I will probably do another one of these when I have more figured out. But I wanted to put this out there now. This probably will sound like a scattered mess. Anyway, whatever. If anybody has any ideas about this, though, I'd love to hear them. I really would. I'd be curious to hear any thoughts about this. Anybody with a more, I'll say this again, I've said it before, anybody with a more sciencey background, if you'd like to talk, I would love that, because I definitely have questions that I'd love to actually be able to ask somebody face to face or over the phone or whatever. So yeah, but I'm gonna get going for now. If you want to follow us on Instagram, you can find us at Let's Fuck with Astrology. I'm at Saturn Season Astrology on Instagram. Natalie is at Abaturno Astrology on Instagram. If you want to like or subscribe or whatever the fuck people do with videos on YouTube, you can find us by searching for Let's Fuck with Astrology in the YouTube search bar. If you do the red thing, come join us on the subreddit Let's Fuck with Astrology. And if you're interested in the star cards, go to letsfuckwithastrology.com/star-cards. Okay, y'all. I'll see y'all later.